Could you respond to the assertion of other pagan resurrection myths that are said to predate and influence the resurrection of Jesus?
Yeah. Remember I mentioned that New Testament scholarship has tried all these other things before. And one of them, back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was this attempt to compare Christian beliefs to what one could find in other ancient religions. And one of the things that was tried was to look at supposed resurrection myths of dying and rising gods, like Osiris and Tammuz and Adonis and so forth. And some of the scholars at that time thought to try to explain away the Christian belief in the resurrection as a result of the influence of these pagan myths of dying and rising gods. Well, that movement soon collapsed within New Testament scholarship. And these internet people who are still pushing it are over 100 years out of touch with scholarship on this issue. Why did it collapse? For two reasons. Number one, the parallels turned out to be spurious. In fact, there are no parallels in ancient mythology of dying and rising deities. For example, Osiris, one of the most popular of these myths, doesn't really come back to life at all. He just continues to live in the nether realm of the dead, in the underground realm of the departed dead. He doesn't come back to life in this world. And a Swedish scholar named Trygg Mettinger recently did a study of these dying and rising gods. And he says that among scholars who still think that there might be dying and rising gods in the ancient world, these are regarded as dinosaurs in scholarship today. And he tries to salvage just a couple that look like they could be dying and rising gods, but even he admits they don't have any parallels to the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus is a Jewish idea that is without parallel in other ancient religions. The second reason that this movement collapsed was, in any case, there's no causal connection between these pagan myths and the first disciples of Jesus. I mentioned before that what has happened in New Testament scholarship in the latter half of the 20th century has been the eclipse of mythology as a relevant category for the historical Jesus and the rediscovery of the Jewishness of Jesus. And it was realized that it was simply the wrong interpretive background to try to understand Jesus of Nazareth and the Gospels against the backdrop of these Greco-Roman and other sorts of pagan myths of dying and rising deities. So that there just isn't a causal connection. Jews were aware of these pagan religions, and they found them abhorrent. And so there are no cults of these seasonal dying and rising gods in first century Israel. No trace at all. So the idea that the disciples would sincerely come to believe that Jesus of Nazareth was actually risen physically from the dead on the basis of these myths is just utterly implausible. And so for that reason, this is a movement that has been tried and found wanting in New Testament scholarship and doesn't command significant scholarly following today.